Following the Golden Rule with Andrew Faas is proudly supported by Remax St. Andrews. Live and vacation by the sea. Choose wisely. Choose Remax.
Hello, my name is Andrew Faas, and welcome to Following the Golden Rule.
And I'm Jay Remer, and for 26 weeks, Andy and I will be discussing the ABCs of leadership. And today we're going to be discussing T is for trustworthy, which is a very important word. And so, Andy, what are your thoughts about trustworthy and how important it is in the world today?
Well, of all of the characteristics, I guess it's the most important word. And in the work I do, I outline a number of characteristics necessary for active and positive inclusion and engagement. And the number one condition is trust. And that's mutual trust is between an organization and their stakeholders. The second is a sense of stability and security. The third is a sense of purpose. The fourth is a sense of efficacy, and the fifth is the ability to speak truth to power. Mm-hmm. And what you'll note on all five of them, they are interrelated, mm-hmm. Just the way all of the characteristics that we're going through are interrelated. And there are different words that can describe a various characteristic. Mm-hmm. So for example, trustworthy, maybe a better terminology is transparency. Mm-hmm. And when I look at the analysis that I've done and research that I've done in terms of trust indexes that are done by various groups, one of the biggest, one of the things that really jumps out at me is people do not trust because they do not have the right information.
Okay.
Or the information.
Mm-hmm.
I guess word of the year, two words of the year for this last year may be fake news. And the media, are taking a hit relative to being challenged on, what is real and what is not. And I think we should cut them a little bit of slack on that, because what they're reporting on, they in many, if not most instances, don't have the full set of facts in order to report what should be reported.
Right.
And so there's a lot of commentary on that, and mm-hmm. people interpret the commentary to be the news. Mm-hmm. But absent the real facts, the only thing they can report, or the only thing they can convey, is their perspective and commentary. Mm-hmm. There's a recent example of transparency, or the lack of transparency. Minister of Finance in Ontario went on the 13th of December, went to a Caribbean country.
Right.
And which, in and unto itself is stupid. May not be dishonest, but it's stupid. Mm-hmm. When the government of Ontario is asking people to make some sacrifices in yes. terms of staying home.
That's right.
And for many people, staying home means not being able to work.
Yeah.
And for most people, it means not being able to see their family and mm-hmm. and having the important connections, particularly this time of year. So it's stupid. Mm-hmm. But his actions became dishonest. Mm-hmm. When it was reported that during his stay, his staff made out like he was conducting business from Ontario.
Oh.
In terms of making announcements and doing this, and having a fireside chat, encouraging people to stay at home. When that transparency became dishonesty.
Yes.
And it's a good one to use because it's so recent. And it's this type of thing that has caused the level of distrust in most of our institutions. And I've written about this stuff for the last 15 years, and there are more stories relative to corruption and greed and dishonesty, and that's one issue in terms of the act itself, and cases of harassment that's created the Me Too movement, etc. What's going on in the RCMP in Canada. And what's gone on with the Boy Scout movement, and what's gone on with the Catholic Church, and yes, those are horrendous, dishonest, corrupt, name it. But the bigger issue is the cover-ups.
Yes.
And senior leaders in all of those organizations, and in most of those organizations that have been exposed, in the first instance and for a long period of time, were not transparent, and they hid behind the fact, oh, well, we were not aware. And when they became aware, they blamed the most junior employees for being complicit, and therefore they received the punishment or accountability. And in very rare circumstances, where the board or the CEO or members of the C-suite held accountable. And I can list you examples a mile long where that's occurring, and it's still occurring.
Yeah. So the question is I can understand why you would cover up something that you've done wrong, but the question is why is it so consistent through so many organizations that people are doing things wrong? Why is it that people are not being transparent, and why is it that they feel they have to cheat in order to get ahead?
Well, in my view, it stems from the top. So if the top is corrupt, then it filters its way down. And to get ahead, you are expected to follow suit. And in America today, it's at the very top. And people who are complicit for a reason, and you can only speculate.
That's right.
On that. But it's culture.
It is culture.
And if an organization has a culture whereby a culture of transparency, where there are no hidden agendas, and if something is wrong, people at every level have not only the ability, but are required to bring it up. And they don't rely on, or they don't wait for a whistleblower to blow the whistle. And a good example of a company like that is Chevron. And multinational, multicultural organization, because they are multinational. But one of the terms of engagement of every employee, whether it's the chair of the board through to the janitor, if they see something that is wrong, if you see it, you own it, and you're obliged to bring it forward. And they do ask the question, when did you know? And then what did you do about it? And that's where, in cultures where corruption is tolerated and where there is no transparency, people are unable to bring those forward the way the janitor at Chevron can. And again, I go back to the conditions for engagement and inclusion, where trust is at the top.
Yes.
And the fifth one is the ability to speak truth to power.
Which takes quite a lot of courage. And it may, I mean, that's my guess,
Sure.
having been in that position myself. So if we go back to the studies that you've done that have been backed up year after year about the number of people who are engaged and happy with where they work and trust their employers and all of that kind of thing, speaking truth to power is obviously a problem. And so what I'm wondering is, have in companies like Chevron, where you have seen this as a positive, what do you see as the difference between companies like that and companies that haven't reached that, the ability for their, all of the stakeholders really to speak truth to power?
One indicator and is a benchmark comparison of how they perform on a sustainable basis. And if you look at the peer group with Chevron, they've outperformed.
Okay.
So that's just one indicator. Another indicator is turnover staff, and where people are likely to stay until they retire, where the churn in their peer group is relatively high. It's a dirty industry.
Okay.
Dirty in terms of oil is dirty. And the ability to attract and retain people, particularly professionals, engineers, becomes a lot more difficult. Gender diversity becomes a lot more difficult. And they recognize that it was very important for them to make sure that they had a culture whereby people felt where there's one, diversity, and two, where there's inclusion. And the word inclusion people kind of use loosely, but my research has shown that if you're not transparent, it's impossible for you to be an inclusive culture. So you have to open up the books, if you will, and expose the good and the bad, and and people, because people have to be aware of it.
That's right.
To be able to fix it.
That's right.
Or to improve on it, or to change it.
Yeah.
And that's where, it's become a kind of an HR word, and how we're very diverse, and being diverse is simply counting the heads, and being exclusive is making sure every head counts, and again, making sure that people understand everything they need to know about how the business operates, and what are the metrics, and where are the gaps, and where are the improvements necessary, because they're counting on those people to make those changes to improve. So it's a kind of a different take on trust, because trust is, people think, well, if I say it, people will believe me. We got into that when we talked about B's for believable.
That's right.
Well, people Yeah, Alan Gottlieb, came out, former U.S. ambassador to the U.S., Canadian ambassador to the U.S. He talked about a lot of pundits and others, like economists, and he came up with, I thought, was a great statement. He says, they speak well, they write well, but they're wrong. God bless them.
Well, that's going to happen too, because there always are going to be differences that way, and somebody is going to be wrong and somebody's going to be right. But what I'm wondering is, we're going to need, as we go through the recovery from 2020 and into 21 and 22 and beyond, there's going to have to be some sort of cultural change in order to increase transparency. And I'm wondering whether or not in any of the companies that you've worked for and sort of turned around a bit, if you can share any of the dynamics that really need to be focused on in order to see a change occur.
Well, I think the biggest is is how people view culture. And the purpose of culture historically in organizations has been to make people happy. And in the companies that I've been responsible for, yes, that's the ultimate. But it's defining happiness and what makes people happy, and that's understanding, what motivates them, what causes stress in their lives. And creating a culture whereby, and I define culture culture is defined by, or certainly influenced by, the relationships that an organization has with its stakeholders, all of their stakeholders. And then relationships are defined by the value exchange propositions that they have with their stakeholders. And in the organizations I've been responsible for, we created a culture whereby all of our stakeholders were considered partners. To renew and re-energize and to reform an organization. And if you're a partner, you're required to be transparent with them, and share the knowledge, so that as partners you can build the organization to a common purpose.
It also, I think, if you treat everyone as a partner, people probably tend to feel more engaged. I mean, they become more engaged, but they feel less threatened, and that that's a very difficult dynamic to achieve. What I have found is,
if I could just stop you there.
Yeah.
And engaged is a very loose term as well, and I think the more important term is they feel included. And so one of the things in this recovery that organizations have to do is include their stakeholders and include them as partners. And that means being transparent with them. Organizations really wrestle with that. And, to cut them a little bit of slack, one of the reasons they do is they are being advised in many cases by their legal counsel to say as little as possible, because the more you say, the more you're at risk of being litigated against. And I understand why lawyers do that, to protect their clients. But it can get to a point where it becomes a restrainer versus an enabler. And what is the risk of only saying the minimum. And what is the benefit of being more open and transparent? And in my experience, the more open and transparent you are, particularly internally to your stakeholders, the greater the level of trust. And so in this whole restructuring, I think organizations really need to take a hard look at the advice they're getting and weigh that risk.
Well, I think one of the things too is understanding that, you know, we're human beings, and the way our brains are organized, they're not to make us happy; they're to keep us alive. So we have a lot of misconceptions about what makes us happy, and I think that as we begin to understand through example or experience that things that we think make us happy don't make us as happy as we think they're going to, and things that we think are going to really make us unhappy don't make us feel as unhappy as we think. So hopefully taking risks will be less threatening as we understand that they're really not as bad as we anticipate that they're going to be. And so there's a lot of learning to do, and I think that as we've talked about before, the recovery is probably going to hinge to a large degree on entrepreneurial action. And so when you're starting with smaller groups, I think it's easier to form the trust and the transparency and all that kind of thing that's so important to, you know, to be able to scale up.
Well, I'm not sure. You know, my experience has been mostly with larger organizations, but we've really focused on our culture, where people relate to it on a more local level. And so whether it's geographically local or it's departmental local, and what we found is that the relationship between the supervisor and the employee really defines the relationship that they have with the overall organization. And again, transparency is key. And again, research that we've done on this is those supervisors who communicate on a regular and ongoing basis with their employees on what's going on, i.e. transparency. So how did we do yesterday or last week? What are we planning on doing next week? And what do you need from me to be able to deliver on that? And if that simple discussion occurs on a regular basis, ideally once a day or at least once a week, where they can do that period in review, and then look at it in terms of where we're at today, and then where we're heading tomorrow. And here's what we need to understand, and here's what we need to do to make that a reality.
In putting this in terms of, you know, sort of day-to-day activities that all of us are engaged in, you know, relationships with family and so forth, I remember one of the things that my father used to always say to me. He said, and this is not a new term, we've got to get all the cards out on the table. And that's what transparency is all about. And my experience has been that if you do that, even though there will be some cards that will be painful, and probably rightfully so, if you get them all out on the table, you can reach solutions and make progress, and everybody can wind up in a better position had they not been. So
it's a great expression.
Yeah, and it actually is something that we all have heard at one time or another, and it really does pay off. So we just have another couple of minutes, Andy. I'm wondering if you have any closing thoughts on trust and transparency, and what you'd like to leave us with as a final reminder.
Well, same old. Reflect on it in terms of how transparent you are, whether it's in your family life. Do you lay out all the cards on the table? Are you dealing with the elephant in the room?
Skeletons in the closet.
So skeletons in the closets, the warts on the face,
Yeah.
like whatever. But it starts with self-reflection and doing it in the context of all the other characteristics that we've identified, and as we've gone through this, there are many more, and they all tie and interrelate.
It is absolutely amazing, because week after week, as we focus on another word, we think, well, that actually referred back to. And it really is amazing how everything is interdependent. So thank you very much for discussing transparency and trust today. And thank you for sharing your time with us. And we look forward to seeing you next week when we will be discussing U is for Unifier.
Following the Golden Rule with Andrew Faas is proudly supported by Remax St. Andrews. Live and vacation by the sea. Choose wisely. Choose Remax.